Chapter 22. If Chapter 21 ended with the party crashing, this chapter is the country waking up with the worst hangover in its history. Unemployment hits 25%. A quarter of the country is out of work, and the government that is supposed to help is, at first, philosophically opposed to helping too much. This chapter is really a story about the size and shape of government itself, how much power the federal government should have during a genuine crisis, who that power protects, and who gets left out of it anyway. Those questions don't stay in the 1930s. You'll hear them again today, sometimes using the exact same tools, sometimes literally the same union. 4 things today. 1. How Herbert Hoover's philosophy of limited government collided with a catastrophe it couldn't limit, and who paid the price for that collision. 2. How Franklin Roosevelt built the New Deal, and the critics from the left and right. 3. The New Deal's real limits, who it left behind, and the political fight it triggered by 1937. 4. What you need for your exam. Let's begin. Herbert Hoover takes office in March 1929, months before the crash, with a genuine record of humanitarian service behind him. But his governing philosophy is voluntarism. Government and business should partner, gently persuade, encourage good behavior, not impose it. That philosophy meets a catastrophe it was never built for. Hoover does more than his reputation suggests. He creates the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to loan money to failing banks and railroads, and eventually funds public works. But he refuses to let the federal government directly relieve suffering families, insisting that job belongs to local charities and city governments, who are themselves broke. By 1932, banks are failing, farms are foreclosing, and Hoover's own tax hikes and the Hawley-Smoot tariff instead trigger foreign retaliation that makes the whole crisis worse. The clearest picture of Hoover's failure comes in the summer of 1932. Roughly 20,000 unemployed World War I veterans march on Washington demanding early payment of a bonus Congress had promised them. They camp peacefully in the Anacostia Flats. When Hoover orders the camp cleared, General Douglas MacArthur wildly exceeds his orders. The Army burns the veterans' shelters and drives out families with tear gas. Live ammunition wasn't used, but tanks and cavalry against your own hungry, unarmed veterans is still a remarkable image for a sitting president to own. It's the moment Hoover fully loses the country, and it's not the only time a park in the nation's capital gets cleared by force for political optics. In June 2020, federal law enforcement forcibly cleared peaceful demonstrators from Lafayette Square near the White House using tear gas and mounted police. Defenders called it a necessary, lawful action to restore order. Critics called it an inappropriate use of force. Same basic political trap, using visible force against your own citizens. Racial injustice deepens the human cost. In 1931, 9 black teenagers, the Scottsboro 9, are falsely accused of rape in Alabama and sentenced to death by an all-white jury with barely a defense. The Supreme Court eventually overturns their convictions, twice. Once because they lacked adequate counsel, and once because Alabama had systematically excluded black jurors. But the last defendant doesn't leave prison until 1950. And in the Southwest, the federal government deports roughly 1 million people of Mexican descent in what was euphemistically called repatriation. The majority of the people expelled were American citizens by birth. Los Angeles alone ran more than a dozen deportation trains straight to the border. That's maybe the most direct through line. Reporting from 2025 documented U.S. citizens detained and deported during a renewed federal push. Cases the government described as mistakes, while civil rights groups described them as a predictable consequence of enforcement moving faster than due process. 1932, Franklin Roosevelt beats Hoover in a landslide, and in his famous first line as president, tells the country the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Whatever else you think of the New Deal, Roosevelt's genius was restoring confidence, partly through substance and partly through radio. His fireside chats let him talk to the country directly, like a neighbor rather than a distant official. In his first 100 days, Roosevelt pushes through an avalanche of legislation. He shuts down failing banks temporarily to stop the panic, then reopens the solvent ones, backed by the new Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. The Agricultural Adjustment Act pays farmers to produce less, though large farmers benefit most and sharecroppers often get pushed off. The National Recovery Administration tries to get businesses to agree on fair wages voluntarily. The Tennessee Valley Authority brings electricity to an entire impoverished region. The Civilian Conservation Corps puts young men to work planting trees. It is an enormous, improvised expansion of what the federal government does, tried all at once, with mixed results. Not everyone thinks it goes far enough. Huey Long, the kingfish of Louisiana, builds a Share Our Wealth movement promising every family a homestead, funded by taxing the rich, 7 million members before an assassin's bullet ends his run. Essentially the same pitch progressive lawmakers make today. Father Charles Coughlin turns from a Roosevelt supporter into a bitter critic laced with anti-Semitic theories. And Dr. Francis Townsend proposes a monthly pension for seniors. Facing pressure from the left flank Long and Coughlin represented, Roosevelt pivots harder toward direct relief in 1935. The Works Progress Administration puts 8 million people to work. The Social Security Act creates retirement pensions and unemployment insurance. And the Wagner Act guarantees workers' right to organize unions, protected now by a real federal enforcement agency instead of just good intentions. That legal protection changes everything. In 1937, auto workers at a General Motors plant in Flint launch a sit-down strike, refusing to leave the factory. Women organize a women's emergency brigade to keep strikers fed. After 6 weeks, GM caves, and the UAW becomes a permanent force. In September 2023, the UAW launched the stand-up strike against all 3 Detroit automakers simultaneously. Same union, same industry, same basic leverage. For all its scope, the New Deal was never an equal deal. Federal Housing Administration loans went almost entirely to white families. Redlining maps literally marked black neighborhoods as too risky to lend in, systematically locking families out of the main tool most Americans use to build wealth. That's part of why, starting around 2019, a wave of American cities began experimenting with local reparations programs, specifically targeting the descendants of redlining. Social Security and minimum wage protections excluded domestic and agricultural workers. Historian Ira Katznelson called the federal government an instrument of white privilege. For Native Americans, the picture is mixed. Commissioner John Collier pushes through the Indian Reorganization Act in 1934, ending forced assimilation. It's real progress, but Collier administers it top-down, requiring majority rule voting that clashed with tribes who traditionally governed by consensus. Politically, Roosevelt's 1936 landslide re-election looked like total vindication. It also made him overconfident. In 1937, frustrated that the Supreme Court had struck down New Deal programs, Roosevelt proposed adding up to 6 new justices. Nearly everyone saw it as a power grab. The plan collapses in Congress, badly damaging Roosevelt's political capital, right as a conservative coalition forms to block further expansion. That argument didn't end in 1937. In 2021 and 2023, members of Congress introduced the Judiciary Act to expand the court to 13 justices. Same underlying tension. So here's Chapter 22 for your exam. The Great Depression forced a permanent answer to how big the federal government should actually get. Know your contrast pairs. Hoover's voluntarism versus Roosevelt's direct federal relief. Long, Coughlin, and Townsend versus the Wagner Act. The New Deal's real economic reach versus its real racial exclusions, FHA redlining, and farm and domestic worker carve-outs specifically. Every time government expands power in a crisis, someone pays a real cost. The fights over the boundaries of that power don't resolve, they just resurface. You just heard 3 of them resurface: crowd clearing near the White House, the fight over the Supreme Court, and immigration enforcement catch-ups. Lock in your dates: 1932, the Bonus Army and Roosevelt's election; 1933, the 100 Days; 1935, Social Security and the Wagner Act; 1937, the Flint Strike and court packing; 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act, the last major piece before the conservative coalition shuts it down. Get your Chapter 22 source response done in Canvas. See you in Chapter 23.